Our physical and mental health have suffered terribly due to the neglect of the Mauritian, US, and UK government. The UK court recognized the 2000 the other belongers on the island and that our exile was illegal. But the UN institution, UK government, the UK court recognized the 2000 the other belongers on the island and that our exile was illegal. But the UN institutions have given our rights to the Mauritian government, who refuse to recognize us as a people. Instead, they use St. native as a bargaining chip for their own claim on sovereignty. The Human Rights Watch report in March 2023 found the UK and US government guilty of a crime against humanity towards the St. people. There has been no official apology, no remorse, no solution, no reparation has been proposed to the St. However, the UK and Mauritius government have already started negotiations for the sovereignty of our beloved motherland without consulting us, the St. True belongers have become tenants. Is the United Nations just going to sit and let this injustice carry on until the last native St. die? We are not Mauritius of St. origin. We are St. We have English culture, way of life, and generational link to the land and ocean of our island. The UN also seems to think we are a people with no right and no say in our future. Distinguished members, I ask for an urgent investigation and review to how the UN will protect the indigenous rights of the St. And I also want to ask the Mauritian government, where were they when St. were dumped like animals in the dock of Portris, when St. women and children were gassed and beaten by Mauritian police? Where was the Mauritian government? Thank you.
Invito a la distinguida delegación de la Organización Internacional sobre Propiedad Intelectual para que tome la palabra.
Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the forum, distinguished delegates and representatives of indigenous organizations. Tukuishunguan Yupaitani, Tukuya Apukunata, Tukuya Hatumamakunata, Yunkachikta Kumbashkamanda, Chinayata Sumak Samaita Karashkamanda. These were words of greeting in Quichua, the native language of my people, the Quichua Otavalo in Ecuador. It is my honor to speak on behalf of the Secretariat of the World Intellectual Property Organization. My name is Sara Fuentes Maldonado, and I am the Indigenous WIPO Fellow. WIPO firmly believes that traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions as embodiments of indigenous peoples' ingenuity and creativity are key resources for their well-being and a better future. The WIPO Training, Mentoring, and Matchmaking Program on Intellectual Property for Women Entrepreneurs from indigenous peoples and local communities aims at supporting tradition-based community entrepreneurship so that they can make informed decisions about the strategic use of intellectual property tools, if they so wish, to promote their community enterprises and enhance business opportunities for the benefit of their communities. After 2 worldwide editions, the program has expanded regionally as well, with initiation in 2022 of a program supporting community entrepreneurship in 4 Indian countries. In parallel, intense negotiations at the WIPO Intergovernmental Committee on Intellectual Property and Genetic Resources, the Traditional Knowledge and Folklore, the IGC, continue with the objective to finalizing an international legal instrument or instruments relating to intellectual property, which will ensure the balanced and effective protection of genetic resources, traditional knowledge, and traditional culture expressions. The draft instruments being developed so far on traditional knowledge and traditional culture expressions include drafting options that underline the collective nature of the rights under negotiation. A workshop comprising 7 indigenous experts organized last February reviewed the draft text being negotiated and issued a report that was transmitted to the IGC. Indigenous peoples representatives participate actively in the negotiations as observers. The WIPO Secretariat strongly encourages contributions to the WIPO Voluntary Fund that has been created in support of such participation. As an important offspring from the negotiations, a diplomatic conference to conclude an international legal instrument relating to intellectual property, genetic resources, and traditional knowledge associated with the genetic resources will be
Invito a la distinguida delegación de Colombia para que tome la palabra.
Gracias, señor presidente. Somos los pueblos indígenas, un río grande y profundo que se alimenta de todos los ríos, arroyos, manantiales y afluentes. No cabe duda de que este foro ha permitido dar paso hacia la reparación histórica y el reconocimiento de los pueblos indígenas del mundo. Por esa razón, el señor presidente Gustavo Petro participó en la sesión de apertura y ha manifestado su compromiso con esta agenda. Sin embargo, es necesario reconocer que aún falta mucho para lograr la plena protección y promoción de nuestros derechos. La participación indígena es una cuestión indígena. Podemos contribuir de forma diferencial y significativa. Por esta razón, Colombia considera que el foro debería estar presente en todas aquellas discusiones que considere pertinentes al interior del sistema de Naciones Unidas e implementar las recomendaciones en los órganos y marcos normativos ya existentes. A su vez, los estados deberían implementar las conclusiones y recomendaciones que salen de este espacio del foro permanente. Tenemos la plena convicción de que solo de esta manera lograremos que este foro sea más directa y efectiva con los Estados miembros. El actual gobierno ha hecho compromisos importantes en esta línea, con el Plan Nacional de Desarrollo, que se encamina hacia la superación de la deuda histórica de que tiene el Estado colombiano con los pueblos indígenas, las comunidades afrodescendientes, mediante el mejoramiento de nuestra participación en el desarrollo de las políticas públicas y el combate a las fuentes estructurales de discriminación y exclusión para la construcción de la paz. Adicionalmente, el reordenamiento territorial alrededor del agua y el fortalecimiento de la justicia ambiental buscan priorizar la función ecológica y nuestras formas propias y ancestrales de relación.
Doy las gracias a la distinguida delegación. Invito a la distinguida delegación de Sami Council para que tome la palabra.
Gracias, señor presidente. Thank you. Indigenous sisters, brothers, siblings. Let me first express that the Sami Council fully supports the statement by the Sami youth on the topic of climate change and the rights-based approach. We heard them raise the question, if saving the world from climate devastation comes by sacrificing the indigenous world to fulfill the needs of the colonial states, then what are we even fighting for? What future is left there for our youth? Mr. Chair, we as indigenous peoples gathered here again share the message with the UN and the world. We have cared for our lands and territories in a way that they still remain healthy and productive. We did not protect our lands for others to destroy. The critical challenge that remains is that the global community needs to get off from fossil fuels and reduce emissions while transiting into alternative energy sources without placing the burden of this shift on indigenous peoples. The green shift cannot happen by compromising cultures that have kept the ecosystems intact. We need to address the interconnected crisis of biodiversity loss and climate change together. For example, in Finland, a tourist center in Saariselkä was heated by burning old-growth forests. This is not the solution, but it's part of the problem. The sustainable use of land, territories, and resources by indigenous peoples must be a fundamental part of climate policy development and biodiversity conservation. Only by respecting the self-determination of Sami and other indigenous peoples can we strengthen our resilience, protect the life on our territories, and build a more sustainable future. We have lost a lot, but we still have a lot to fight for, and we will keep on that fight. Thank you.
Su declaración. Invito a la distinguida delegación de la Organización Internacional del Trabajo. Tome esta palabra.
Buenos días, distinguido presidente, miembros del Foro Permanente y delegados. Según los últimos datos de la OIT, existen 476 millones de personas indígenas, lo que constituye el 9,3% de la población global. Sin embargo, el 19% de ellos se encuentran en situación de pobreza extrema. Observamos que las mujeres y los hombres indígenas tienen más probabilidades de tener un empleo que sus homólogos indígenas. Sin embargo, la calidad del empleo al que acceden suele ser deficiente. A menudo, los pueblos indígenas sufren malas condiciones de trabajo. A menudo los pueblos indígenas sufren malas condiciones de trabajo y discriminación, incluyendo salarios más bajos. Los pueblos indígenas ganan en promedio el 18% menos que sus contrapartes no indígenas. Sin embargo, en su mayoría los pueblos indígenas son ocupados en la economía informal. Hablamos de un 85% de ellos, desprovistos de derechos y de acceso a la protección. La crisis sanitaria y socioeconómica derivada de la pandemia del COVID-19 ha evidenciado las desigualdades existentes, ya que ha afectado de manera desproporcionada a los pueblos indígenas, entre otros grupos, y ha puesto de manifiesto las brechas en su acceso a la salud, la educación, la vivienda, el trabajo decente, entre otros. Según un reciente informe de la OIT, un poco más de la mitad de la población indígena goza de aseguramiento de salud, y el porcentaje de indígenas aportantes pensionistas es menor al de no indígenas, una diferencia de aproximadamente el 10% en ambos casos. También la crisis ha subrayado el papel fundamental de los sistemas de protección social universal para ofrecer a las personas cobertura de su bienestar a lo largo del ciclo de vida y para apoyarlas en tiempo de crisis y amortiguar caídas en sus ingresos laborales, a fin de que favorezcan la celebración de consultas y participación con los pueblos indígenas, asegurando que estos puedan incluir con sus prioridades de desarrollo las decisiones que adoptan los gobiernos. Asimismo, es el momento de asegurar un rol activo de las mujeres y hombres indígenas para hacer realidad la protección social universal y dar forma a un futuro con más justicia social. Para avanzar en esa línea, es fundamental aplicar el convenio número 169 y avanzar en ampliar su ratificación. Para que se llegue a este objetivo, los pueblos indígenas deben estar sentados en los espacios de toma de decisión, participando en la formulación de políticas de protección social inclusivas y coherentes con sus realidades. Desde la OIT seguimos comprometidos y avanzaremos conjuntamente con nuestros constituyentes, con los pueblos indígenas y socios de la cooperación internacional en brindar asistencia y contribuir a garantizar mejores condiciones de vida para los pueblos indígenas, asegurando que gocen de sus derechos humanos en igualdad de condiciones. Muchas gracias. A garantizar mejores condiciones de vida para los pueblos indígenas, asegurando que gocen de sus derechos humanos en igualdad de condiciones. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a su distinguida delegación. Invito a la distinguida delegación de Panamá para que tome la palabra.
Sí, buenos días. En representación del Gobierno de Panamá, y en calidad de viceministro de Asuntos Indígenas, y a nombre de nuestro excelentísimo señor presidente de la República, Laurentino Cortizo, y del pueblo panameño, quisiera informar en esta asamblea los avances que mi país ha realizado en los 6 ámbitos del mandato del Foro Permanente de la ONU sobre los derechos de los pueblos indígenas. En el ámbito del desarrollo económico y social más pobre del país, estrategia multisectorial que busca impulsar procesos de desarrollo territorial, potenciando la política pública y la institucional del Estado en áreas de pobreza y vulnerabilidad. También tenemos el plan de empoderamiento de las mujeres indígenas de Panamá, PEM. También se diseña un plan de trabajo denominado la GTC, con programas de proyectos y beneficios sociales, con escuelas, con comarcas, agua y saneamiento, agrotiendas, beneficios sociales para combatir y cambiar la pobreza multidimensional. En el aspecto de la cultura, actualmente se encuentra en segundo debate el proyecto 244, que pretende proteger los derechos lingüísticos de los pueblos indígenas, destinar los recursos económicos necesarios para la Dirección Nacional de Educación Intercultural Bilingüe, entre otras disposiciones. En el caso del ambiente, contamos con una ley 11 el 26 de marzo del 2011. Esta ley reconoce el derecho de las comarcas al uso y el manejo y aprovechamiento tradicional y sostenible de los recursos renovables y prohíbe el otorgamiento de concesiones para la exploración y extracción de la minería metálica y no metálica. También tenemos el programa de educación ambiental de la comarca a través del Ministerio de Ambiente. En educación, tenemos que se ha implementado la EBI en las 5 comarcas y pendiente en una, la recién creada la comarca Nazo. La reglamentación de la Ley 88 del 2010, que reconoce la lengua indígena como nuestro idioma materno. Pertinencia cultural en la prestación de servicios y expansión de la educación intercultural bilingüe. Creación de la Ley 288 de la Universidad de los Pueblos Indígenas, donde se realiza este lunes un convenio entre el Ministerio de Educación y esta universidad. En el tema de salud, tenemos desarrollo del sistema de salud intercultural, capacitación a los proveedores de salud, las parteras empíricas, fortalecimiento del sistema de salud en la rehabilitación, equipamiento y construcción de centros de salud, agua y saneamiento, la ley 17 de medicina tradicional. En derecho humano tenemos la ley 301 que establece el plan de desarrollo integral de los pueblos indígenas de Panamá, al igual que la ley 37 de
la clase delegación. Invito a la distinguida delegación de Chirapac que tome esta palabra.
Gracias, hermano presidente. Los pueblos, mujeres y juventudes indígenas nos enfrentamos a un contexto hostil caracterizado por el racismo y múltiples violencias, la crisis climática y ambiental, el retroceso de las democracias, la polarización social y política, el fundamentalismo religioso y la corrupción generalizada. Los movimientos antiderechos están adquiriendo más poder y estamos rodeados de desinformación y noticias falsas que tratan de deslegitimar nuestras demandas. Frente a este panorama, apostamos por las nuevas generaciones y planteamos soluciones que impacten a toda la sociedad, generando condiciones favorables para el ejercicio pleno de nuestros derechos individuales y colectivos. Complementando las 110 recomendaciones anteriores del Foro Permanente en materia de educación, desde Chirapa presentamos las siguientes propuestas sobre educación pública. Los estados deben desarrollar e implementar políticas y planes educativos que promuevan la afirmación de las identidades culturales y la ciudadanía intercultural, la erradicación del racismo y las violencias, el respeto y la defensa de los derechos humanos y de la madre tierra, y la sanación individual y colectiva importante. Es fundamental que la educación contribuya al desarrollo del pensamiento crítico, colectivo y solidario, y fortalezca las habilidades para cuestionar y desafiar las desigualdades, señor presidente, injusticias y discriminación basadas en la pertenencia a los pueblos indígenas, género y otros factores. Los estados deben garantizar la participación plena y deliberativa de los pueblos, mujeres y juventudes indígenas y de nuestras organizaciones en el diseño, implementación, administración y evaluación de las políticas, programas y planos educativos, y de esta manera asegurar que nuestros sistemas de conocimientos, historias, culturas, lenguas, tecnologías, valores y contribuciones estén dignamente reflejados en el Sistema Nacional de Educación. De manera complementaria, pedimos a erradicar la imagen estereotipada de los pueblos indígenas a través de los medios no
formales y formales de presentación a los pueblos indígenas y respetar nuestros derechos a la comunicación. Apoyamos también la participación y los aportes de la UNESCO, que hace esfuerzos sobre los futuros de la educación y construcción de nuevas propuestas en sociedades multiculturales, así como los aportes de la FAO y la OIT. Muchísimas gracias, hermana presidenta.
Gracias a su invito a la distinguida delegación de la Secretaría de la Convención sobre Diversidad Biológica. Thank you, Mahaya. At COP15, parties specifically adopted the Kunming-Montreal Global Diversity Framework, a landmark agreement towards safeguarding global biodiversity. The primary focus of the framework is to support the three objectives of the Convention: conservation, sustainable use, and fair and equitable sharing of benefits. In this process, to accomplish this, the framework acknowledged that its goals and targets should be achieved through the full and effective participation of indigenous people and local communities. The framework set 4 outcome-oriented goals, 23 action-oriented targets, and it specifically includes the recognition of indigenous rights included over their traditional territories in targets 1, 2, and 3. It also takes a major step toward environmental and social justice by balancing the protection of biodiversity with human needs. This includes, for instance, the sustainable use of wild species, agriculture, and forestry, taking into account livelihoods and customary practices of indigenous people and local communities. The commitments in the framework are grounded in the human rights-based approach, recognizing that human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, along with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The important role of women is promoted through the Gender Platform Action adopted at COP15. The monitoring framework aims to track progress at all levels toward the achievement of the targets. The monitoring framework is based on a set of quantitative and qualitative indicators, including indicators on traditional knowledge. Ultimately, the Kunming-Montreal framework provides a comprehensive roadmap for addressing the major environmental challenges that humanity currently faces, recognizing that biodiversity conservation and sustainable use are essential to achieve a more just and sustainable future for all. The Secretariat is also pleased to inform that the Nature and Culture Summit, a major parallel event during COP15 under the auspices of the Joint Program of Work between UNESCO, IUCN, and the CBD, produced the Kumian-Tokian Nature and Culture Summit Declaration toward flourishing biodiversity. The next session of the working group on Article 8J in November 2021 will address the recommendation of the last sessions of the Permanent Forum. Let's continue to work together in close cooperation to ensure that the voices of the indigenous peoples are fully recognized. Thank you. Invito a la distinguida delegación de Sudáfrica para que tome la palabra.
Chairperson, dignitaries present, distinguished members of the Permanent Forum, ladies and gentlemen. Our government continues to accord priority to the 6 mandated areas of the Permanent Forum. Creating jobs and reducing unemployment are the key economic and social challenges that our government is addressing. The presidential investment conferences held recently have generated 1.2 trillion investment that will support the expansion of human capital and knowledge transfer and create more jobs and learning opportunities. Furthermore, to ensure that the right to work is protected, the Department of Employment and Labor has also published the new national minimum wage for South Africa with effect from April 2023. Chairperson, South Africa endorses Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, especially ensuring the right to access to quality health and the provision of free basic education and freedom to practice cultural rights as enshrined in our Constitution. On education, the Ministry of Science and Technology research policies promote an Afrocentric and democratic vision for higher education's contribution to the national good of the sustainable development of the country. The languages, our government continues to protect indigenous languages. In 2020, our government revitalized the Khoisan languages and set aside funds to develop digital resources for these languages. The core deliverables of the undertaken project are the limited edition hard copy dictionary, a dictionary app, and online dictionary portal. The Pan South African Language Board has recognized the need to officialize the Khoi and San languages, although they are already protected. This will have serious implications to the development of their lexicographic pedagogy in written and spoken form. We will report on the forum on progress in this regard. Chairperson, gender-based violence and femicide has been identified as a serious pandemic in our country. The scourge continues to undermine the dignity and development of women and ultimately the nation at large. The establishment of the Ministry of Women, Youth and Persons with Disability, located in the Apex Office of the State President in 2019, has been instrumental in this fight against GBV and femicide. Lastly, Chairperson, South Africa remains committed to give practical effect to the rights enshrined in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in tandem with achieving sustainable development goals. And so must it be for all countries with historical garbage of colonial onslaught in territories of indigenous persons and nations. I thank you.
Invito a la distinguida delegación de Untitled Tribuni Papua Barat.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Accepted our salute. Mena Muria. I come from South Moluccas Territory, western part of Melanesian Crown coalition with West Papua, still under Indonesia worst colonization during 73 years old, since 1950. The South Moluccas people exercised their self-determination exactly at April 25th, 1950, and performed an existing state, the Republic of South Moluccas, according to the right given to us by Round Table Conference, December 1949. In July 1950, Indonesian Federation and Indonesian Republic invaded Republic of South Moluccas and its people, annexed us until now, with all inhuman treatment we face from time to time. This massacre of over self-determination of South Moluccas people is the biggest violation of human rights. South Moluccas self-determination had been legalized by international decisions, namely by International Law Association June 1950, by judgment of courts of Amsterdam November 1950, by judgments of the Court Appeal in Amsterdam February 1951, by agreements of Supreme Court of New Guinea, March 1952. Different nations had been discussed widely via case presentation in United Nations Commission and Human Rights, March 1996, via peacekeeping and peacemaking role of the United Nations and role of the World Federation United Nations Association, May 1971, via Commission on Human Rights, 54th session, March 1998, via Commission on Human Rights 55th session, April 1999, but all of March 1998, via Commission on Human Rights 55th session, April 1999, but all of this action still in vain up to now. South Moluccas become a poorest territory due to extraction of natural resources and deforestation by Indonesia, also cannot be developed for Indonesia's fraudulent activity in the politics, economic, and human rights approach. Preamble of Indonesia Constitution 1945 in paragraph 1 said, whereas independence is the inalienable rights of all nations, therefore all colonialism must be abolished in this world, and it is not in conformity with humanity and justice. This statement is very contradiction with the fact sought colonization over all Indonesia says the right of all 15 states, as well as South Moluccas Republic and West Papuan Territory. The South Moluccas people fervently hope that United Nations Special Report on the Rights of Indigenous People advising Indonesia.
Ofrezco la palabra a la distinguida delegación de Canadá.
Thank you. My name is Roxanne Baldwin. I am originally from Cartagena First Nation and a representative of the Canadian delegation. In the spirit of enhanced participation, we would like to defer our time to the Assembly of First Nations National Chief, Roseanne Archibald.
Miigwech, Wachimaswe, Roseanne Archibald, Tishakasan, Dadakasma, Ishakatdakochian. I thank you to the Canadian Mission for giving me this space with them. As National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, I have previously mentioned that I am the first woman to hold this office, and I welcome another opportunity to address you today. Current priorities of the AFN include economic reconciliation. Truth and reconciliation must include economic reconciliation. All the wealth in Canada is built upon First Nation lands, whether those are treaty lands or unceded territories. All around the world, colonial and republic states are stealing the wealth of Indigenous peoples, which is their inherent birthright. On our many lakes, streams, and enormous landscapes are the product of thousands of years of effective resource management by First Nations. And that has been stolen without our free, prior, and informed consent. We need a new economic field outside of the cyclical federal budgetary process that allows First Nations the autonomy, the self-determination, and the self-government as referenced under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as well as guaranteed to us through the Canadian Constitution. When the Special Rapporteur visited Canada, we had this conversation asking for his international support and voice on economic reconciliation. Advancing economic reconciliation must go hand in hand with helping communities heal from intergenerational trauma. To complement our economic goals, Canada and other states also need to establish national healing funds to undo the damage of colonialism. First Nations require long-term sustainable funding commitments to deal with the intergenerational trauma from residential institutions. I don't call them schools anymore. I call them what they were, institutions of assimilation and genocide. We representatives at this forum talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, including U.S. Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland. As National Chief, I'm here to amplify our priorities around missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and looking forward to the work ahead. Me.
Invito a la distinguida delegación de Yamal, the next Association of Indigenous People of the North Yamal Colombian.
Уважаемый господин председатель, на российском Ямале проживает около 50 тысяч коренных малочисленных народов. Это примерно 20% от общей численности в России. Из них 18 тысяч – это кочевники. А многие из остальных проживают в национальных деревнях, берегах рек, тайге. Это особенно ценно в условиях продолжающейся глобализации, когда коренные народы целых регионов мира значительно утратили традиционную образованность и связь со своими землями поколения назад. Столкнувшись с политикой западного колониализма и ассимиляции. Так, 500 тысячелетий, находящихся в частной собственности коренных народов Ямала и около 150 тысяч в коллективной, составляют основную часть мирового домашнего стада. Сохранение оленеводства надежно обеспечивает воспроизводство нашего самосознания. Для содержания таких стад требуется пастбища сотни тысяч квадратных километров. Однако, несмотря на то, что на Ямале добывается более 80% российского газа, число кочевников стабильно растет. В этой связи наш безусловный приоритет — сохранение качества традиционных земель. Для этого требуется эффективная программная деятельность, а также дополнительные меры по землеустройству, учету земель и научных организаций маршрутов выпаса оленей с целью сохранения их кормовой базы. С учетом того, что к местам традиционного проживания, традиционной хозяйственной деятельности коренных народов Ямала актами федерального правительства отчислено более чем 700 тысяч квадратных километров, решение этой задачи очень долгий и дорогостоящий процесс. В масштабах же Российской Федерации к традиционным землям отнесены миллионы квадратных километров. Важное значение имеет и научное сопровождение перехода хозяйств коренных народов на другие типы оленеводства, включая лесное, не имевшего до этого широкого распространения, но предусматривающего доступ к свободным землям. Такие работы на Ямале проводятся за счет государственных средств, но требуют повышения эффективного участия в них коренных народов. Как собственные проекты в этом направлении реализует Российская ассоциация коренных малочисленных народов Севера Сибири и Дальнего Востока, старейшая, крупнейшая зонтичная сеть 40 коренных народов России, в которой входит и ассоциация Ямала, которую я возглавляю. Сохранение качества традиционных земель связано с состоянием нашего ментального здоровья, образа жизни, языковой среды и самосознания. В этой связи, господин председатель, я бы хотел рекомендовать постоянному форуму обобщить практики и разъяснить эффективные подходы картографирования, учета и иной хозяйственной организации традиционных земель с помощью государственных и собственных механизмов коренных народов. Благодарю за внимание.
Invito a la distinguida delegación del Fondo Internacional para el Desarrollo Agrícola de Chile.
Distinguished members of the Permanent Forum, representatives of indigenous peoples and colleagues. On behalf of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, I wish to thank this forum for acknowledging IFAD's progress in its partnership with indigenous peoples. For over 2 decades, IFAD has been working closely with indigenous peoples and their organizations to build trustful partnerships. IFAD recognizes and celebrates the contribution of indigenous peoples to sustainable development and supports their well-being, the use of traditional knowledge and practices, as well as the conservation of cultural heritage, biodiversity, and natural resources. In 2022, the Forum exhorted IFAD to continue its efforts in operationalizing the principle of free, prior, and informed consent. And we are pleased to inform that IFAD, with financial support from the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, is operationalizing FPIC in its projects, particularly through the involvement of indigenous consultants in project design. Specifically, through this initiative, IFAD has hired indigenous experts to facilitate the FPIC process and develop indigenous people's plan to comply with IFAD safeguard requirements, as well as with the requirements of the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility. This process aims at ensuring that indigenous visions, aspirations, and knowledge are embedded in IFAD projects implemented in areas home to indigenous peoples. In 2022, through a participatory mechanism led by the members of the steering committee of the Indigenous Peoples Forum at IFAD, IFAD has also updated its policy on engagement with indigenous peoples. The updated policy brings a paradigm shift through which IFAD works with indigenous peoples as equal partner who continue to co-creating strategies and designing investments to improve their livelihoods based on their own perspectives. At the core of the policy lies IFAD's commitment to finance programs and projects that build on the identity, culture, and knowledge of indigenous peoples. IFAD is also facilitating direct access to funding for indigenous peoples community through the Indigenous Peoples Assistance Facility, which over the past 16 years has proven its capacity to foster self-driven development. IFAD will continue to prioritize the indigenous peoples in its programming and investments and support their participation in decision-making processes in order to achieve the SDGs and build a more just and sustainable future for all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Doy la palabra a la distinguida delegación de Vietnam.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. Vietnam is a country of diverse culture and home to 54 different ethnic groups. As such, we attach great importance to the safeguarding the rights of ethnic minorities and have taken significant steps to ensure their inclusion and participation in the society. The Constitution mandates the protection and promotion of minority rights. It requires the state to protect and promote legitimate rights and interests of all ethnic minority and prohibit any form of discrimination against them. We have also implemented legal framework to provide further protection for minority rights, including the law on ethnic minority and the law on religions and belief. The government has adopted several social programs to promote education and job opportunities for ethnic minority groups and provide assistance for those in need. The National Target Program for Poverty Reduction and Sustainable Social Security has been crucial in reducing poverty in ethnic minority, and this program provides support such as access to education, healthcare, and infrastructure development to help ethnic minorities lift themselves out of poverty. We have established mechanisms for dialogue and consultation among ethnic minorities while also facilitating communication between this group and the government, recognizing the importance of in fostering national unity, social harmony, and cultural diversity. The government in Vietnam has spared no efforts to preserve and promote the ethnic languages and culture of ethnic minority. Vietnam education system includes provision for teaching minority languages with bilingual education program offered in many areas. This program provides teaching in both the minority language, and Vietnamese, allowing students to maintain their cultural identity while also gaining fluency in the national language. Additionally, initiatives have been taken to develop textbooks and other education material in minority languages, providing greater access to education for ethnic minority students. The preservation and promotion of ethnic languages and culture is also carried out through the establishment of the culture centers and museums, and this center provides space for preservation and display of traditional art, music, literature, and other cultural artifacts, as well offering educational program and cultural events. In addition to these efforts, Vietnam has also made strides in promoting
Also, and I am a member of the Gurindji Nation of Australia. My organisation is led by the grandmothers, and our advocacy targets the infamous Don Dale Youth Detention Centre in Australian Northern Territory. On any given day, all of the children jailed there are Aboriginal, and the vast majority are on remand. It is a condemned prison where children are locked in blood-stained concrete cells for up to 23 hours per day. Behaviour is managed through the use of force and isolation. Changes to bail laws in 2021 has seen the increase in over 200% in children being caged, and over 400% increase in self-harm and suicide attempts inside. Children who are granted bail are shackled in ankle monitors. The imagery is loaded with historical significance. The incarceration of Indigenous children in Australia is a human rights violation and undermines the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly Goals 1, 3, 10 and 16. This is a direct result of the systematic racism and perpetuates cycles of poverty and marginalisation to prevent Indigenous communities from thriving. Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals requires addressing the root causes of this violence, including the ongoing legacy of colonialism, and investing in community-led solutions that prioritise healing, restoration and decolonisation. Children have a right to be supported on their own country with access to their culture, community and kin, the things that have been sustaining our people since the first human sunrise. I recommend that the UN Indigenous Specific Mandates urgently coordinate a UN-wide response to create a global consensus that children's prisons are never appropriate or acceptable in any circumstances, and support a call for an Australian Child's Rights Task Force. Directly supports First Nations people to building self-governing structures and capacity to lead restorative justice. States Australia must withdraw its reservation to Article 37 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child and sign the third optional protocol without delay. Thank you.
Invito a la distinguida delegación de FAO para que tome la palabra.
Distinguished Chair and experts of the Permanent Forum, honorable elders, indigenous leaders, and country representatives. The FAO would like to congratulate the new experts of the Forum and Darío Mejía as chair of this session. The FAO is committed to the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the UN SWAP. The words by Secretary General Guterres at the opening session reaffirmed our commitment to continue working with indigenous peoples. Since 2014, we have been putting in fast track the Forum recommendations to our agency. Let me highlight some of them. In 2017, the recommendation to organize an Indigenous Youth Forum became a reality in 2021. FAO is happy to announce that with the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, Sami People, and the World Reindeer Herders Association, we will be hosting the second session of the UN Indigenous Youth Forum in October in Rome. This is the only Indigenous Forum that FAO hosts, with the objective of complementing IFAD's Indigenous Forum also taking place in Rome. Last year, the UN Permanent Forum recommended FAO and WHO to amend the Code of Conduct on Pesticides. The work has started, and we invite indigenous experts to join WHO, PAHO, and FAO in this work. FAO takes this opportunity to thank the Rapporteur on Indigenous Peoples, the Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights, and the Forum Chair, as well as the International Indian Treaty Council for the key interventions to open this process of amendment of the Code of Conduct. Lastly, the UN Permanent Forum recommended FAO, after the White Wipala paper, to continue work on indigenous people's food systems. In March this year, the Global Hub on Indigenous People's Food Systems met in Rome. More than 90 indigenous people's experts discussed on indigenous food systems. FAO is very pleased to announce that 5 different drafting committees were agreed, with indigenous researchers collaborating in key publications. This work is fundamental to support the new coalition on indigenous people's food systems. The coalition, after 7 regional consultations processes, is now working and is starting its activities. FAO, together with UNESCO, UNEP, WFP, and IFAD, makes a call to more indigenous organizations and other countries to join the work. FAO would like to thank Kenya for their decision to host this year a high-level expert seminar on indigenous people's food systems in the region. And FAO would like to thank Mexico, Dominican Republic, Spain, Finland, New Zealand, and Canada for their support to the coalition. We thank Norway for the support to the coalition as well as to the support to the UN Indigenous Youth Forum in Rome. With this, we would like to invite all of you to join us at the UN Indigenous Youth Forum in October this year. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the use of the word.
Invito a la distinguida delegación de Australia, por favor, tomen la palabra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Australia is prioritising the 6 mandated areas of the Permanent Forum through our commitment to the National Agreement on Closing the Gap. Under this agreement, priority reforms commit Australian governments at all levels to work in partnership with the Indigenous Australians to design, deliver policies, services and programs to improve our life outcomes. These reforms support self-determination and progress on economic and social development, culture, environment, education, health and human rights. The the priority reforms commit all Australian governments to strengthen and establish formal partnerships and shared decision-making, build the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community control sector, transform government organisations so they work better for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and improve the shared access to data and information to enable Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to make informed decisions. The National Agreement on Closing the Gap aligns with several United Nations instruments on the rights to Indigenous peoples, in particular the United Nations Declaration on the Rights to Indigenous Peoples UNDRIP. Sadly, the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples have become unsustainable chasms, denying First Nations Australians the right to equal opportunities, choices and quality of life. The Australian government is committed to ensuring perspectives of Indigenous Australians are actively considered and incorporated in formal decision-making processes. This commitment includes implementation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, an invitation to the Australian people drafted and delivered by 250 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders in 2017. The voice for Parliament enshrined in the Constitution, along with recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first peoples of Australia, will go to the national referendum this year. Constitution recognition will mean formally acknowledging over 65,000 years of care connection to culture and establishing a permanent mechanism for first Australians to advise Parliament and the Executive Government on how to effectively implement laws, policies and programs that affect us. Australia's commitment to embed an Indigenous perspective also extends to how we engage globally. My appointment as Australia's inaugural Ambassador for First Nations people and Head of Office of the First Nations engagement is a practical demonstration of this. My role will work with Aboriginal communities, both organisations and individuals, and will help grow the First Nations trade and investment and regional engagement, fostering cooperation of shared interests, including action on climate change. I'd also like to include and acknowledge the statement of the IPO of Australia that was just read out earlier today. Thank you.
Invito a la distinguida delegación de Norwegian National Human Rights.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished members of the Permanent Forum, I speak on behalf of the Norwegian National Human Rights Institution. The transition to renewable energy is a critical response to climate change, and the success of the transition depends largely on the transformation of the energy sector from fossil fuels to renewable energy. However, in this transition, human rights, including Indigenous peoples' rights, must be upheld and respected, forcing many Sami communities to defend their rights through the legal system. One of these legal processes resulted in the Fosen judgment, where the Norwegian Supreme Court in Grand Chamber unanimously concluded that wind power plants in the case violates the local reindeer herding Sami rights under ICCPR on Article 27, which in Norway is implemented with precedence over national law. The licenses and expropriation of land were deemed invalid, but the wind power plants were already operational at the time of the judgment in 2021. After that, invalid, but the wind power plants were already operational at the time of the judgment in 2021. After that, the situation for the reindeer herders has not changed, and the state party has not provided an effective remedy or reparation of the damage. Mr. Chair, the Norwegian National Human Rights Institution is very concerned about the lack of follow-up of the Supreme Court judgment 1.5 years ago. The wind power plants on Fosen are still in operation, despite the fact the Supreme Court has deemed the plants being in violation of ICCPR Article 27. This constitutes an ongoing human rights violation. In other cases, where the Human Rights Committee has established a violation of ICCPR Article 27, the committee has underlined the obligation pursuant to ICCPR Article 2.3a to provide for an effective violations from occurring in the future. This has not been done in the Fosen case, We call on Norway to follow up their obligation to provide for an effective remedy. Lastly, Mr. Chair, in the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision, we have noticed an increased frequency and level of hate speech towards Sami people defending their rights. We call on the Forum to recommend the states to strengthen their efforts to combat hate speech against indigenous peoples. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Y la delegación Indonesia tome la palabra.
Mr. Chair, indigenous peoples and local communities play an essential role in preserving the world's biodiversity, mitigating climate change, and promoting sustainable resource management. To truly acknowledge their crucial contribution to biodiversity management, it is imperative to shift our perspective from perceiving them solely as beneficiaries to recognizing them as the rightful guardians of their lands and waterways. This entails promoting an ownership outlook that respects their inherent connection to and stewardship of their land. In this regard, my delegation would like to showcase one of Indonesia's Adat communities, Dayak Iban Sungai Utik, and its customary land located in Kalimantan, Borneo. Through government regulation reform, along with joint efforts between local government and communities, the government acknowledged Dayak Iban Sungai Utik's customary forests. In early 2020, the Indonesian Ministry of Environment and Forestry issued a decree for the Dayak Iban to secure 10,087 hectares of customary forest to be used according to their customary law for the management of water resources, harvesting medical plants, agriculture, and hunting. This is not only contributing to the climate action, but also Dayak Iban Sungai Utik's stewardship also ensures access to clean water, sustainable practices in various production, and contributes to collective economic growth within their communities. Recognizing the Masyarakat Hukum Adat, or the Adat communities, and their customary forests is a manifestation of our firm commitment to safeguarding the rights of the Adat communities and promoting their welfare, reflecting the country's diverse cultural and multi-ethnic diversity. Mr. Chair, once again, it is with our deepest regret that today we see yet another attempt by an individual to misuse this forum to advance its narrow political agenda. Such actions are in contrary to the purpose and objectives of the forum, as well as the fundamental principles of UN Charter and Article 46 of the UNTRIP. It is important that deliberations concerning indigenous issues remain within these recognized principles. Therefore, we seek the attention of the Chair and members of the BFII on this matter, and we request that our statement of this fundamental concern be put into the record of this meeting. I thank you.
Muchas gracias a la delegación por su participación. Agradezco, doy la palabra ahora al Centro para la Autonomía y Desarrollo de los Pueblos Indígenas.
Thank you, Chair. I'm the before the COVID-19 pandemic is not on track. COVID-19 response and recovery measures adopted by states are still not responding to the call for a need to put people and the planet at the center of development. National development plans are still not addressing the specific context, needs, and priority of indigenous people, and the data disaggregation by ethnicity, which is part of SDGs, is also lacking. For the SDG Summit this year, it is important for indigenous people to be visible and to raise our concerns about how the current development paradigm is causing further marginalization and violation of human rights of indigenous people. How these so-called solutions to addressing COVID-19 and climate change impact are resulting in increasing inequality and poverty, especially for indigenous people. With the upcoming midterm review of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, it is important to reflect on the progress, gaps, and challenges in the implementation of the SDGs, especially on the realization of the UN DRIP and self-determined development of indigenous people. We therefore put forward the following recommendation to the Permanent Forum. First, effectively engage with the ECOSOC, especially in the current preparation of the SDG Summit, including in the drafting of the political declaration and for the preparation for the Summit of the future. We further recommended that dedicated consultation be conducted with indigenous people at all levels to ensure that our views and recommendations are taken into consideration in advancing the SDG implementation. Second, engage and collaborate with the UN interagency and expert group on SDGs indicator to ensure data disaggregation by ethnicity and make indigenous people visible in the monitoring and reporting of NCG indicators. Further requests the Interagency Support Group consolidate and report on their action to address the needs and priority of indigenous people in the LCD by 2024. Third, collaborate and work closely with the indigenous people major group to strengthen indigenous people engagement and effective participation in the high-level political forum and other related LCD events, including expert meetings. And lastly, request UN agencies, funds, and programs to step up in their effort and partner with indigenous people at regional and national level for their programs and projects to also address the specific needs and priorities of indigenous people, including allocation of sufficient resources. Thank you, Co-Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Invito a la distinguida delegación de Nicaragua, por favor, tomen la palabra.
Muchas gracias. El Gobierno de Reconciliación y Unidad Nacional promueve en todos los ámbitos el orgullo de nuestras raíces originarias, afirmando el carácter multiétnico y cultural de Nicaragua. Nuestros saludos a las luchas y victorias de los pueblos originarios alcanzadas en los campos económicos, políticos, sociales, ambientales y culturales, en las luchas contra el colonialismo y el neocolonialismo liberal y el imperialismo. Nuestro gobierno reconoce, promueve y garantiza el derecho fundamental de todos los pueblos originarios a su libre determinación, a establecer libremente su condición política, su desarrollo económico, social y cultural, preservación y protección de sus territorios tradicionales y lenguas. De acuerdo con nuestra política nacional